My name is Marjorie Hale, and at 71, I thought I had earned a little peace. I am not the kind of woman who fades quietly into retirement. I keep a tidy home on Church Street in Charleston, tend my roses every morning, and walk the Battery when my knees allow. I built my life brick by brick, sometimes literally, and though my hair has turned silver, my mind is sharp and my back still straighter than most half my age. That Sunday afternoon, I was invited or perhaps tolerated at my daughter-in-law Rachel's brunch. She likes to host her colleagues from Innovate, the company I once poured my life into. David, my only son, married her 10 years ago. She is clever, ambitious, and knows how to command a room, but beneath her polished charm lies an edge, one I've felt cut against me more than once. The sun was heavy on the patio, pressing down on the starched white tablecloths she had ordered for the occasion. I sat quietly in a chair I had bought them years ago, glass of iced tea sweating in my hand. Rachel's friends filled the space with their bright chatter, talking over projects and promotions. I listened without comment, a fixture in the background. Then Rachel turned toward me. Her smile stretched wide, but her eyes stayed cold. She lifted her own glass high enough for her friends to see and said, lightly, as if it were nothing, "Don't mind Marjorie. She's just a retired bum. She doesn't really get how the real world works anymore." The words floated out like a joke, and her friends laughed the way people do when they know they're expected to polite, shallow, sharp around the edges. The sound landed in my chest like a stone. I felt the condensation slip down the glass in my hand, dampening my palm, as if the drink itself recoiled from me. My throat tightened, but I said nothing. The laughter hung in the air, then folded back into casual conversation, as if I hadn't been standing there. As if my life, my years of work, were nothing more than a punchline. The brunch carried on. Rachel leaned closer to her friends, whispering now, and I caught fragments of words that chilled me more than the insult itself. Words about the company, about ownership, about what would soon be hers. And in that moment, the humiliation twisted into something colder, heavier, and far more dangerous. I didn't answer Rachel that day, but the sting of her words carried me backward, to a time when nothing in my life resembled brunches under striped umbrellas or catered spreads of shrimp and grits. Charleston in the early 80s was a city in decline. The shipping yards were bleeding jobs, and storefronts along King Street closed one after another. Richard and I refused to give in. We had an idea, small at first, just a patchwork of systems we thought might help local shipping companies track cargo more efficiently. We started in our garage, the heat pressing through tin walls in summer and our breath clouding in winter. Richard kept grease under his fingernails from his day job, and I learned to stretch every dollar into 3. Nights blurred into mornings. Sometimes dinner was cold beans from a can, eaten over circuit boards and spreadsheets. I remember him looking at me once, worry in his eyes, and saying, "Marge, are we asking too much of ourselves?" I told him no, because the alternative was a future where we had nothing to hand down. The company Haletech grew slowly, then all at once. A breakthrough contract with a regional shipping line gave us footing, and soon others followed. We pivoted as technology shifted, expanding into logistics software, and Charleston's downturn became the ground where we planted our roots. Each client, each line of code was built on our sweat, and 100 sacrifices no one else saw. Now, decades later, I sat in a backyard that my company had paid for, listening to my daughter-in-law call me a bum. The house itself stood like a monument to what Richard and I had given up: our youth, our health, nights we might have spent raising our son instead of raising capital. Rachel walked across those marble floors in heels I had effectively bought for her, smiling at friends whose paychecks traced back to me, and still, she looked at me as though I had done nothing at all. The laughter drifted on as though nothing had happened. Rachel refilled her glass, the ice clinking against crystal, and her friends leaned in. I had learned, after years of boardrooms and negotiations, how to listen without seeming to. The trick is to let your eyes wander, your posture slacken, as though you are too tired to catch every word. People forget you're there. Anna's voice carried first light, dismissive. She had been with Innovate for 6 years, long enough to know the politics, but not long enough to understand the foundation beneath them. "When the shares finally move over," she said, tapping her manicured nail against the rim of her glass, "you'll have a controlling block. Won't you?" Rachel smiled. A tight, knowing curve of her lips. "Exactly. David doesn't really think about these things, but I do. Once her estate transitions, I'll consolidate. I've already asked around about the best way to fast-track it." She lowered her voice. "But not enough. There are lawyers who specialize in this. Timing is everything." Leo chuckled, the kind of sound that makes skin crawl, half admiration, half greed. "Smart. Everyone knows old founders don't stay lucid forever. Better to prepare early." The words should have struck me like thunder, but instead they fell cold and sharp, like shards of glass sliding beneath my skin. This was more than Rachel's sharp tongue, more than her disdain for my age. It was calculation. She wasn't simply mocking me. She was laying the groundwork to erase me, to take the company I had bled for and claim it as though I had never existed. I kept my hands folded in my lap, my face calm, though I could feel the blood rushing in my ears. Betrayal is not always a scream in the night. Sometimes it is a whisper over iced tea, spoken with confidence that you are too old, too irrelevant to understand. In that moment, I understood perfectly. David appeared on the patio as the afternoon wore on, his hair mussed from the breeze off the Ashley River, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow. He looked like his father when he was younger. Solid, dependable, the sort of man people instinctively trusted. For a moment, my chest ached with pride and memory. Rachel slipped easily to his side, brushing his arm, her voice bright as she recounted a harmless anecdote about the brunch. Her friends laughed again, and David smiled, distracted, pouring himself a drink. I watched him closely. His eyes flickered toward me, just for a second, when Rachel leaned across the table and with that same sly grin said, "Mom doesn't really follow these things. She's happier staying out of the way." It was not loud, not sharp like the word bum earlier, but it cut just as deeply. I saw David hear it. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, then relaxed. He stirred the ice in his glass as though he hadn't noticed at all. That small act, his choice to let the remark drift into the air unanswered, hurt more than Rachel's laughter had. My son, who had once sat at my workbench watching me solder circuits, who had begged to ride with his father in the delivery truck, stood in his own yard and chose silence. Rachel knew it too. I saw the satisfaction in her eyes, the confidence that her husband would not contradict her. Not even for me. His quiet was her shield. I looked around that table and realized I was alone. Not one voice rose to soften the insult, not even David's. The people I had lifted with my own 2 hands, the family I had imagined would carry our name with pride, had left me stranded in a place that should have been mine as much as theirs. The laughter resumed. David sipped his drink. I folded my hands tighter in my lap, the weight of their silence pressing heavier than any spoken word. That evening, after the guests had gone and the house grew quiet, I drove the short distance back to my own home. The silence of my study was a balm after the brittle laughter of the patio. Yet my chest still ached with the weight of words left unchallenged. I poured myself a cup of chamomile, though my hands trembled so badly the tea sloshed over the rim. Against the far wall stood Richard's old roll-top desk, oak darkened by years of use. It had been his command post once, where invoices, contracts, and repair manuals piled high during the early days of Hail Tech. I had not opened the bottom drawer in years. My breath slowed as I pulled the small brass key from its hiding place in a jar of paper clips and slid it into the lock. The drawer groaned open, revealing a metal box, plain and heavy, its corners scuffed from being moved too many times. I set it on the desk and lifted the lid. Inside lay the bones of a lifetime, the original articles of incorporation, brittle with age but still stamped with the state seal, the family trust document naming me as majority shareholder, and one more envelope, sealed with Richard's precise hand. My fingers trembled as I opened it. The amendment drafted by his lawyer before his final illness outlined a clause I had nearly forgotten. In the event of misconduct or breach of duty by any heir, control of my shares would revert immediately and fully to me. It was his safeguard, his way of ensuring I would never be outflanked in my own house. Beneath the legal language lay a single sheet of Richard's stationery. The ink had faded, but his handwriting was steady. Protect the company and protect yourself. I pressed the note to my chest, my throat tight. For years I had let the younger generation believe I had stepped aside entirely, content to be the grandmother in the garden, the woman with nothing left but stories. But I was not powerless. The company was still mine in ways Rachel could not imagine. The betrayal I had overheard was no longer just cruel. It was dangerous, and I now held the key to stop it. 2 mornings later, I found myself walking down Meeting Street, the cobblestones slick with last night's rain. Charleston has always been a city of facades, grand porches and painted shutters concealing the weary bones of centuries. I felt something of that in myself. The old oak beams still standing beneath a weathered exterior. Arthur Vance's office overlooked the harbor, a view that always reminded me of the years when Richard and I dreamed of more than survival. Arthur had been our lawyer for nearly 3 decades, a steady hand through growth and grief alike. His hair was white now, but his eyes still sharp. "Marjorie," he said, ushering me inside. "I hear there's trouble." I set the metal box on his desk, the sound echoing in the quiet room. One by one, I laid out the documents, the incorporation papers, the trust, the amendment Richard had insisted upon. Arthur studied them with practiced care. Nodding slowly, "She's moving too fast," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, whispering about lawyers, about consolidating control. And her friends at Innovate, Anna and Leo, they're feeding the arrogance. I won't be erased from my own company. Arthur leaned back, folding his hands. Then we moved decisively. I'll draft resolutions reaffirming your authority as majority shareholder. HR can prepare separation agreements. But this won't be quiet. Marjorie, it will hit your family hard. I nodded, though a hollow ache opened in my chest. Do it. By afternoon, we had spoken with David Chen, the CEO I had handpicked years earlier. He was respectful as ever, though I caught the flicker of relief in his expression. Perhaps he had grown tired of managing Rachel's overreach himself. Together, we mapped the process. IT would lock access with a single command. HR would deliver notices under Arthur's direction, and security would be on call should anyone resist. When I left the office, the clouds had broken, sunlight glinting off the Cooper River. My hands were steady now, though my heart was not. I could already see the fracture ahead, my son's loyalty tested, his marriage pulled taut. Protecting myself meant breaking something that might never be whole again. And still, I knew I had no choice. The following Sunday, the house was alive again with voices. Rachel thrived on these gatherings, where colleagues lounged on her patio, sipping chilled wine and tossing around industry jargon as if the future of Innovate rested entirely in their hands. I sat at the edge of it all, a familiar shadow in my own family. Rachel's laughter rose above the others. "You know how it is," she said, gesturing toward me with a casual flick of her hand. "Marjorie doesn't really keep up anymore. She's happier just sitting back, watching." Her friends chuckled. The same brittle sound that had haunted me all week. This time, I did not fold my hands in silence. I reached beneath my chair and lifted the metal box I had carried in. The sound of it striking the stone table cut through the laughter. A hush followed, uncertain and sharp. Rachel blinked at me, irritation creeping into her perfect smile. "What's this?" "Marjorie." I opened the lid, sliding out the yellowed articles of incorporation. The paper trembled slightly in my grip, not from age, but from the weight of what I was about to do. I placed it flat on the table and pointed to the signature line. "R.C. Hale," I read aloud, my voice steady. "Founder and chairman." The silence deepened. Anna's smirk faded first. Leo leaned forward, squinting. Rachel's face drained of color. She laughed weakly. "That can't be you." "Retired." David said I stepped back. I said, my eyes on hers. "But I never left. This company carries my name. My husband and I built it from nothing, and every share you've boasted about comes through me." The words hung heavy over the table. Her friends shifted in their chairs, no longer laughing. Rachel's hands gripped her glass so tightly I feared it would crack. For the first time in years, I felt the room belonged to me again. The patio had gone still, as though the city itself were holding its breath. I felt the weight of the moment press against my chest, but my hands were steady as I reached into my purse and drew out my phone. One short message, just a single word, was already typed and waiting. "Execute." I pressed send. Almost at once, the atmosphere shifted. Anna's phone buzzed first. She glanced down, her confident expression faltering, eyes darting nervously as she scrolled. A second later, Leo's phone chimed with the same urgent tone. They read in silence, their faces draining color in unison. "My access," Anna whispered, fumbling with her screen. "It's locked," Leo swore under his breath, trying his badge app, only to find it deactivated. Panic rippled across their features as the realization struck they were out, cut from the very company they thought they were shaping. Rachel turned to them, confused, then back to me. When her phone buzzed, she didn't move at first, as if refusing to believe what waited there. At last, she looked. Her lips parted, but no words came. I watched her hand tremble, her knuckles white around the glass she still clutched. "You," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "You fired them, you—" The French doors opened softly, and two uniformed security officers stepped onto the patio. Their presence was calm, professional, but absolute. They waited without a word, the quiet guardians of a decision that had already been made. Anna gathered her bag with shaking hands. Leo muttered something about unfairness, but he didn't meet my eyes. They left quickly, the sound of the gate latching behind them final and sharp. Rachel remained frozen, her career unraveling in real time. Tethered too tightly to me to survive alone, she stared at me not with anger, but with something worse: recognition. Justice had been done. Yet as I looked at my son's wife, pale and trembling in her own backyard, I felt the victory settle heavy in my bones. a hollow crown I had never wanted to wear. Rachel stayed seated long after her friends had gone, her face pale against the bright afternoon light. When the security officers finally retreated indoors, she found her voice again. "You didn't have to humiliate me," she hissed, eyes glistening. "You could have handled this privately. Instead, you destroyed me in front of everyone." I looked at her, this woman who wore the house, the clothes, the name my sacrifices had built, and felt no anger left, only a weary kind of sorrow. "Rachel," I said quietly, "I built Hailtech for my family, not to hand it over to ambition without respect, not to become a joke in my own son's home." David had been silent until then, standing a few paces away with his arms folded tight across his chest. His eyes flicked between us, torn in a way that made him look younger, like the boy who once begged me to stay up late after a double shift so I could hear him read aloud. "Is it true?" he asked finally, his voice heavy. "What Mom said, that you've been planning behind her back?" Rachel's lips parted, but the denial died there. She had no ground to stand on. Her silence said more than any argument could. David's shoulders sagged. He looked at me then, truly looked at me, and I saw grief in his eyes for the marriage he thought was solid, for the blind trust he'd given. I took a breath, steadying myself. "I won't throw you onto the street. Rachel, you'll have temporary housing, severance enough to land on your feet, but you will not step foot in Hailtech again. That door is closed." Her chin trembled, and for a heartbeat, I glimpsed the young woman David had fallen in love with, full of fire and hope. Then it was gone, replaced by cold resentment. David said nothing more. He turned away, the choice not spoken but understood. I stood then, smoothing the skirt across my knees. I still loved them both, my son as fiercely as ever, my daughter-in-law in the way one loves family by blood and bond, but that love no longer came without conditions. From here forward, it would live or die by respect. The weeks that followed passed in a quiet I hadn't known in years. The storm had broken, leaving its wreckage, but also a kind of clarity. Rachel packed her things and returned to her parents' home in North Carolina. I heard little beyond a brief message through David, clipped and formal, saying she needed time. Perhaps she did. David came by often, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with nothing but his presence. We sat together on my porch in the evenings, the cicadas humming, the Ashley River catching the last of the sun. He spoke less of Rachel and more of memory, asking about the days when Hailtech was just a desk in a garage, or about how his father used to whistle when he soldered. I could see the weight of disillusionment still heavy on him, but there was space now for truth between us, a thread of understanding that hadn't been there before. One evening I brewed a pot of mint tea and carried it to the porch. The air smelled of salt and magnolia, and the river turned gold under the sinking sun. I settled into my chair, my knees aching as always, and let the warmth of the cup seep into my hands. So much had been taken from me over the years' time. Sleep, years of health, money, too, had always been fragile, flowing as easily as it could vanish. But respect was different. It could not be stolen. It had to be earned, preserved, protected. Without it, everything else collapsed. I looked at David beside me, his profile outlined against the orange sky, and thought of Richard's old words, tucked away in that desk drawer. Protect the company and protect yourself. Now I understood. A legacy isn't a crown to wear. It's a foundation to honor. And if respect, not wealth, were the only inheritance you left, would your family treasure it or squander it like dust?